So, Robert, I have to confess something to you. I was watching some of your videos, like on Instagram and stuff,
Yeah.
and I'm like, I got to figure out if this guy's married. And I saw a ring, and I'm like, oh crap. So
I appreciate the compliment. Let's
yeah,
go down it.
I went ahead and put on makeup anyway, but
that's great.
All of our listeners know that Kristen goes through the dating ringer all the time. So, yeah.
No, I got a compliment. I'm going to be insufferable now. This is great.
Okay. Well, don't sick your wife on me. I didn't take it any further than that. I stopped my stalking as soon as I saw you were wearing a ring. Okay, so
we'll just cut this part out.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't
Narrator,
know.
It was not cut out. Right.
Right.
It was not cut out. That's right. So, can you introduce yourself for us?
Sure. My name is Robert Callahan. I'm an attorney at the law firm of Callahan & King in Waco, Texas. I'm also an author. This is my first book, which is being released on September the 24th. It's entitled Fire in the Hole, WHOLE. And the subtitle is Embracing Our Righteous Anger with White Christianity and Reclaiming Our Wholeness.
All right. Love it. Okay. So, can you start by defining white Christianity for us? I know that's jumping right in.
Right in. I mean, deep
You're
in.
sitting here with two little white women.
Right.
Tell us what you...
Yeah. Give us the dirt.
Right.
Lay it on.
That's a good point for your listeners. I am African American, and so it is a really heavy topic within the book itself because it's such a loaded term, just the word white by itself. But what I wanted to do when I was writing the book is I needed to try to identify this just toxic blend of Christian nationalism and ableism and patriarchy and all the things that are mixed into what we typically just refer to as evangelicalism, right?
Right.
And I think that most people would probably understand what I was talking about, particularly in the Bible Belt, if I were to say evangelicalism. But if you go to New England or if you leave the United States altogether, evangelicalism doesn't have the same stigma attached to it. You know, especially like the African evangelical church or the Latin American evangelical church don't suffer these same political problems that we have. What I really wanted to tap into is this 81% of white Trump supporters that voted for him and identified themselves in the 2016 election as born again or evangelical, according to the Pew research that was done. And you know, the fact of the matter is that when you really think about it, the problem isn't evangelicalism, right? Because we've seen issues with the Southern Baptist Convention. We've seen issues within Catholicism. We've seen issues among atheists. So it's not, that's not the issue. And then moreover, you have, you know, there's in America, a Latin American evangelical church, right? And there's a Black evangelical church, and like those, that's not the group that's causing the issues that we're wrestling with. So as
you are correct.
So I'm glad that this is a safe place. This is great, so I can just be myself.
Yes. We get it. Yes.
So it's like, you know, how do I identify, what do we call this group? And, you know, the fact of the matter is that, like, you know, Christian nationalistic, patriarchal, cisgendered, ableistic, just like all that doesn't roll off the tongue very well, you know?
Right. Yes. So I'll read your quote. You said, toxic white American capitalistic patriarchal heteronormative Christian nationalism.
Yeah.
Or you said those, I loved this one, those whose orthodoxy and orthopraxy are dictated by an unshakable yet misguided tangle of faith and right bridled political and social conviction that is antithetical to everything Christ represents.
Yeah.
I'm so attracted to you right now.
That's awesome. I'll take it. That's funny.
Yes. I was like, yes. I mean, your book, I was just
Preach.
like underlining and
Yeah.
starring it. Yes, you were just preaching. I was like, okay, thank you for that definition. That is, yes, absolutely. We are right there with you. We get it. And then you did go on to say white Christianity, the term, is a worldview that encourages cultural homogeneity.
Homogeneity.
How do you say that?
You know,
Homogeny, right?
yeah, so I've said
Homogeneity?
homogeny, and then I've said homogeneity, and then so I'm not sure. I just
Homogeneity.
my job is to type it.
Homogeneity. We'll say homogeneity. Okay. Cultural homogeneity through assimilation. So you say it's not
Right.
even just white.
Right,
folks.
right, yeah, and that's
Yeah.
so. I mean, long story short, it's this subset of Christianity that intentionally ignores or doesn't give any weight or conscious consideration to the effects of racism or prejudice in the church, even though it has all the
Yes.
tools and resources to do so if it wanted to.
And the knowledge.
And then-
yes.
yeah.
It's not like it doesn't know.
Yeah.
It just ignores it, which then, once you have education and you have all of this information and then you ignore it and you ignore it and you're doing so intentionally,
Right.
then it becomes violence.
Right. Yeah. And so, and it's important to note when you have these definitions that means that you can have minorities that perpetrate the ills of racism internalized in the same way that you can have, as women probably understand, that you can have internalized misogyny. And so white Christianity is not about Christians who are white. It's about, like you said, normalizing that certain political, theological perspective that have intermeshed and become so problematic in our world right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
well spoken.
personally, yeah, absolutely. So why was this a book that you felt you needed to write?
I don't know if you're familiar with Hamilton, the musical.
Yes.
There's this great scene where the song where he talks about writing his way out. I wrote my way out. And in 2020, I came as close as I've ever come to a panic attack as the world was just literally on fire. And I did not know what else to do. And so I just started writing as kind of a form of therapy, really, to help me cope with
Yeah.
everything that was going on. And within, 24 hours, I, had like, I don't know, probably 2 chapters worth of words. And at the time I was still on Facebook. Oh gosh. And, and so I was regularly posting there, and I was like, okay, this is too long for a Facebook post. So what is this? And then I thought about, okay, do I want to try to pitch an article to a newspaper? That didn't really seem to be what I needed to do, but I just kept writing. And pretty soon, I had like 5-6 chapters worth of material within probably a month. And I realized, I think this is a book. And so that's where I started really concentrating on trying to get my words beyond my small city, and beyond myself, so that they can help other people.
Yeah. Yeah. What was it about 2020, or what was going on for you personally? Because you do talk a bit about some trauma that you've experienced. Obviously, just not what was going on just in the world was traumatic.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, we had political turmoil, right, with Trump. We had COVID. We had the things that really were hitting, those things I might have been able to navigate under quote unquote normal circumstances. But on top of that, we had just a parade of hashtags, right? We had Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery.
right.
We had
Yes.
Botham Jean here in Texas, up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They're just Philando Castile, like just, name your victim. And it was just too much mentally for me to handle. And when it seemed like white conservative Christians were starting to get it and they were starting to ask questions, there was all of a sudden like this whiplash effect where all of a sudden it was quote woke, or it was Marxist, or CRT or whatever, in order to reevaluate these systems that we've been living within. And so all of a sudden all that support that was starting to build went away, and it felt like the conversations were slipping away from our fingers, and I had to figure out a way to stay sane through all of this. There was just so much. And where I'm in Waco, Texas. This is a very conservative. I mean, we are.
You
probably,
poor thing. You
Yeah.
poor,
So you get
poor
it.
man.
I mean, listen. I was here before Chip and Joanna mined the first shiplap, and this town was not. We're improving some, but I mean, it's been very. We are the rhinestone on the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. We've got Baylor University here. We've got it's so red, and trying to find allies in that time period among this sea of red, it was just so hard. And so I had to work really hard to write my way out.
Yeah, man. Ugh. I have so many thoughts, so many things. I mean, the whiplash that you're talking about, as a little white woman who was noticing all of this and really appreciating the conversations and everything, and then to see the whiplash that you're talking about, really, from my perspective, was a huge escalation of fear from a lot of my white family, from just, I can see it kind of percolating a little bit. We got Black Lives Matter, and these conversations are happening, and there's like this unity, and it's amazing. From my perspective, I'm like, this is amazing, it's so good. And then all of this kind of talking about, they're trying to take over, and all this like fear and all this stuff that started happening, and then that whiplash is a great way. It's a great way of describing it. Like, no, it started slipping away then, and how do we get this back? These conversations back. So yeah, right there with you. Who do you see? You had talked about this book helping people. Who do you see as the audience? Who do you see as the people that you really want to put this in front of, who might hear you?
Yeah, your target audience.
Yeah. So this is really a book at its core. It's about healing from spiritual abuse in the form of racism and patriarchy and LGBTQIA discrimination. So in short, if you identify yourself as a minority who has been hurt by Christianity, even if you are no longer identifying as a Christian, this is a book for you, because it is about how we go about healing from the trauma of white Christianity. Yeah.
And I love that you really stick with this theme of fire. That, Gloria Steinem says, the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off. And that's like the fire, right? Of like this, that I've seen, because that's my work is within religious trauma, that I've seen and I experienced it. I mean, I was pissed off for a good 5 years after, and my, little friends, ex-friends, whatever, the community were like, you're just so angry. And I'm like, yeah, I'm never been allowed to be angry my entire life. And now I feel angry, and I'm going to allow myself to just kind of sit in this anger for a while. But that's what I've noticed, is that anger. And so you talk about anger being this fire in your bones, but then you also go then to but fire can be a warmth that we can sit around,
Yeah.
right? It warms us and it can refine us and purify us and all of these different ways that you talk about fire. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think the anger part that you really start with is really important.
Yeah.
To just validate that.
Yeah. And first of all, let me just say that I began reading your dissertation and it's amazing. And thank you for sharing it.
Much.
This is the vocabulary that I got from it was like residual religion, like, or residue, religious residue.
Residue.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Fire plays a big part in the book. So first of all, I was inspired by that verse, I believe is Jeremiah 29, where he's like, I'm tired. I'm so tired of talking about this. But then again, like if I don't, then I just feel like this is trapped in my body, like fire in my bones, and I can't help but speak. And so like, I that's what, when you say that I've never been allowed to be angry, I so much relate to that, because that was, we were never taught in traditional Christianity, fundamental Christianity, that anger was anything but bad.
Right.
And it could be, there's plenty of people that are willing to talk about changing the culture and how Jesus fashioned a whip and cleared out the temple and turned the tables upside down when it suits their purposes, right? But otherwise, you're not allowed to be angry, particularly as a minority. Again, whether that be as a woman or whether that be LGBTQIA, whether that be as a racial minority, we're not allowed the luxury of being angry about the state of the church or the state of the world, even though these are ways in which God's heart is angered and frustrated, and so ours should be too. And so the book is structured in 3 sections, and in the first section, fire is a beacon. It calls everyone together to this community to say, if you are angered or injured in these ways, if you're recovering and trying to figure out, like, where do I go from here? If you're deconstructing and trying to hold on to your sanity, like, this is your people. And so it becomes this place for us to rally around. And in the same way that if you think about, like, sitting around a fire pit or sitting in the backyard and, like, doing a bonfire among friends, like, there's these times where fire has been a catalyst for really intimate and personal conversations, and so, like, that's what I wanted to do in this first part, is to create that same sort of imagery in the community and say, like, hey, we're all here together, let's just talk about it, let's identify all the ways that we have been hurt by white Christianity. And then in the second part of the book, fire, we actually increase the heat of the fire, and we stoke the flames by throwing things into the fire, sort of, 1990s evangelical style. We're going to break the CD and throw it in the fire, right? Like,
we did that. Both of us.
We talked about it.
Yes.
The millennials and Gen Z, they will just never understand. But yeah, it's the same concept, right? It's like all the things that have hurt us. I literally want to encourage people to gather with friends that are like-minded and to, like, write down the things that they are carrying and to throw them into the fire. So we talk about erasure, we talk about gaslighting, we talk about having our voices minimized, having to wear a mask is a really important one. We talk about all these different things, and I literally want to encourage people, kind of like Frodo, like, cast it into the fire,
Yes.
and and let that fuel our anger and our resolve. And then in the third part of the book, fire is this torch that we carry with us, and it is an illumination for our path. And so we take that light that has been produced in part 2, and we use that to encourage us, to galvanize us, to lead us into a place of healing into the future. And we do that together in a community. And I really did want this book to be sort of sensual, and I don't mean that by any way of being, like, sexy, but I wanted it.
Robert.
Sorry. We're not sexually harassing him, Kristen.
No.
You cannot sexually harass us
I
here on
didn't
our
say.
podcast.
I didn't say a thing.
That
was
waiver that I
agreeing.
signed is starting to
I
make
was
so much more
agreeing.
sense now. I just,
Rein her in.
but no, like I wanted this to be something that people, I wanted them to see and to hear and to feel what we're talking about. And so I do encourage people to get together in groups and to do these things. There's a soundtrack literally that my publisher said, hey, we want you to create a Spotify playlist that is, songs that you were inspired by as you wrote this book. And there's
amazing.
several chapters that have songs as themes. And so, there's actually a QR code that you'll be able to have access to that will give you access to the Spotify playlist. So you
I
can
love it.
hear,
Yeah.
and feel and just like all of these things to have a sensory experience.
Yeah. I love
Speaking of which, are you going to have an audiobook version?
Yes, I am
this book?
happy to announce. Yes, we're in the process of trying to determine who's going to be the voice. I'd love to be the voice, but it may not be that case that I'm able to be the voice. But I'm just excited to be here. So I'm glad that there is going to be one, and we're looking now at different potential speakers.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
Good.
As most
Yeah,
of
I
our
would love if you
listening
did.
audience knows, I'm in grad school right now, and I don't lay eyes on text unless
Yeah.
it's mandated of me currently. So audiobook is very important
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
So awesome.
Yeah,
Excited
and
about
So-
that.
I can relate to that because even in law school, I struggled academically, and come to find out, I figured out about 7 years ago, 8 years ago now, because my daughter was 5 at the time, that I have a slight visual processing disorder and slight dyslexia. And the way that we figured that out is because we were going through her own academic struggle and like starting to realize like, oh, the things that she's going through. I'm like, oh, the letters don't move around like they're not
Right.
supposed to.
Yeah.
So I had compensated
Oh.
all this time. So like, I'm a big proponent of audiobooks. So I'm really glad that we'll be able to make it available that way.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah. I hope that you will be the one reading it.
Me too.
You have a great voice anyway, and I think
Yeah.
I just love audiobooks who are in the author's own
Yes.
words, because you're the one who gives the meaning and the feeling to it.
Right,
You
the
know
inflection
what that
makes
is.
sense, and
Yeah.
and it's your own passion behind it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So yeah, going back to the fire, especially part 2. Well, first of all, just let me say, I loved that you started this book with a Monty Python quote. I was dying. I was laughing out loud at so many parts in this book.
Oh,
Just
good.
FYI, there's some really funny parts in it. But the bless this thy hand grenade, I was like, yes! That is exactly how it feels sometimes.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to lobby a fucking hand grenade into, that space.
Yeah.
So let me just say, I thought that was great. The other thing, though, so this issue of anger and not being able to be angry, and I have felt that as well, but I have noticed that white Christianity, I sometimes call them the revelationists, because they so hyper focus on the book of Revelation, and Jesus is like, he rides this horse with a sword and he's coming to slay, and there's streets of blood and all of this, right? They're so angry,
Right.
and they use their anger against minorities. So they're so angry at the gays. They're so angry at anybody who is liberals, or whatever term they use, right? Like, they're so angry against these people that they see are coming to destroy their understanding of Christianity.
Right.
And they believe that they have Jesus riding on this horse with a sword right along with them. And they're so angry, right? That's what we saw at like January 6th, and all these people carrying flags and quoting scripture and praying and everything and believing that they were doing God's work but with anger.
Right.
So how do we separate that? Because I have heard them say that this is their righteous anger. And they believe that Jesus is blessing them to do that.
Yeah.
Where those of us who are like, we're also angry. So how do we make sure that we're not, how do you see the difference there between just rage that's not helpful and a righteous anger that is?
Yeah, the right kind of anger.
Yeah.
I
How do
think
you see that?
anytime that anger motivates us to be kinder, to extend love or protection to our neighbors, to build wider tables, to listen, then it's a great motivator.
Yeah.
And you're right, too often this problematic group, they understand the concept of anger and they're fine with anger when it suits their purpose, right? But there's certain people that they don't want to hear from, and they don't want to indulge our anger. And so for us, you know, there's also a danger for us that the anger can come with bitterness. And so it does have to be the case that we have a right mind and place and outlet for our anger. So let me give you an example. In the book of 1 Samuel, Saul gets his first test as king, and basically there is a smaller city that has been taken under siege by an opposing force, and the city sends out word saying, "Hey, we're going to have to surrender to this force unless you save us." And the Bible says that the Holy Spirit caused Saul to burn with anger. And from that, he rallied people together in order to go and defend this city. And so, you know, that I feel like there is an understanding that we need to grasp that, you know, God has built us with these emotions. They have a purpose. They're not accidental. And there's a time and a place for them. And if that anger can operate as a motivator, as a catalyst to increase our ability to love neighbor well, if it can propel us out of a cycle of abuse within the evangelical Christian church, you know, white Christianity, if it can cause us to seek healing for ourselves and for the next generation, these are all good uses. And so we just have to know how we're using it. And the fact that, you know, even if it's just frustration with the state of being, just the hypocrisy and all the different struggles that we're having in the church, that itself, like, that's appropriate. That's healthy, because the things that are frustrating to God, using his name in vain, essentially, they should be frustrating to us too.
I loved how you said that we have to be careful that the anger doesn't turn into bitterness or include bitterness. There are so many bitter people out there. They've been hurt, but then they become bitter, and that becomes so toxic. And
Because it closes your ears towards hearing.
Yeah.
Right? Hearing
Yes.
other people, or, you know, just being open to learning or having conversations if there's a lot of bitterness and resentment.
I hear people in social work talk a lot about the difference of speaking from a place of scars versus a place of wounds. And wounds are injuries that are still ongoing. They're fresh. And they can be long term. And so, like, there was definitely a point in time where I couldn't write this book. And there were points in time where I would try to sit down and write, and I couldn't, just because I wasn't in the right headspace. because I didn't want to just trauma dump into writing. What I wanted to do is to take this frustration, this fear, this anger, this all of this emotion, and I wanted to say, and there's a way out. There's a way to healing. And it's not, walking out of this process, I'm still angry. But now when I speak, I'm speaking from a place of scars. Those wounds have healed, and there are some traumas that are going to be I'm going to have psychological scars forever.
Right.
And I'm going to be constantly processing how I move with those injuries. But for the most part, I can say now that I'm speaking from a place of more health, I guess is the best way to put it. And so that's where I wanted to get, because there's so many books out there that talk about, how did we get here, and just analyzing, what went wrong, like how did 2016 happen, how did January 6th happen, where do we how do we get to this place? But like we are where we are. We know how we got here. The issue is, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? And so that's really what I wanted to do. And so just avoiding holding on to bitterness. I think there's a season for it, and I think that there's even a function for it, but I couldn't live there. Yeah, I think it was C.S. Lewis has a quote, and it said something to the effect of, "I sat with anger for a long time until I realized her real name was grief."
Amen to that. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. I had a similar story where I was doing some of my own inner healing, and there was like this, she was a teenage version of me that I had put in a chair, and I had like chained her to the chair, and she was so freaking angry, but I wasn't allowed to let her be angry, right? And so, with my therapist, I'm doing the healing, and I'm like, okay, I had named her Rage, and I was like, okay, Rage, I'm gonna let you go, but you need to act appropriately and everything. And she just screamed, and she was like, quit calling me Rage. She said, my name is fucking Justice. And I was like,
wow.
Yes.
Wow.
I was like, yes. That's what I was angry about. It was that this is unjust. What I'm experiencing is fucking unjust. And that was so mad. Like, how do I then turn this around to try to get some, like, I have now the ability, and once I heard her story, this is my teenage self. This is all the inner work I do as a therapist with other people. But I was like, okay, now that I've done that work and I've heard her story and she really calmed down, then we started together talking about, okay, now how do we create justice in our life? What are the choices you have to move forward? So I'm wondering, for you, how did you see that happening? Do you have some ideas about how we move forward and how we heal? I feel like white people just do a real good job of telling black people to sit down, shut up, right? Like, when you've got something to say, we'll hear it a little bit,
right?
Yeah,
but
oh,
not
that's
really.
cute. Yeah,
that's that's cute.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay,
Neat.
Yeah.
Now go sit back down. Or the other thing that I have noticed is that sometimes white allies will try to speak up, and it can tend to kind of infuriate. Like it's not our story to tell, right? And so how do we do that? Like,
how do we do justice? How do we do service to providing justice?
Do you think? Yeah. So I'm throwing a lot of. I'm just kind of talking through, but do you think it will take white people speaking out against the white Christianity? And how do you see a way of doing that, or kind of what are your thoughts about how this happens and moving forward?
Allyship is crucial. Building coalitions and bridges are crucial. But I would say, before we even get to that point, and this is the purpose of my book, is that we have to be whole beings. We have to be in the fullness of our whole selves. And we can't do
Feel
that, until we have worked through this anger, this frustration, and embraced that it has a place, that there is, like you said, that there's an injustice that has been committed against us that we have to work through. And so when we acknowledge that, that means, like, number one, the first way that we can show up as minorities is showing up for ourselves, and that means leaving toxic spaces. And the last two or three chapters of the book are actually dedicated to talking about the very practical ways of how to go about, like, moving from that place of, okay, now we've thrown everything on the fire. Now there's the road to healing. How do we walk that path, and what illuminates us? And so, there is no more time for us to be lingering within spaces waiting for them to get it. Having these lunch and coffee conversations with one person and just constantly litigating our dignity. And then 3 hours later, they're left with sort of like, okay, well, I'll think about what you said. Right. And then meanwhile, there's a line of 100 other people that want to have the same conversation with the same talking points.
Right.
And so I encourage people to stop teaching these 100 level classes. Like there's this, going back to the definition of white Christianity, they have too many resources. They have too much, there's too much information. We live in the information age. Like where everyone carries around with them this supercomputer in our pocket that has instantaneous access to the repository of all human history. And when it's within seconds, it goes up to a satellite somewhere in the sky and then back down. And then I'm done explaining. I'm done explaining myself to you.
You should get this.
You should get this by now. So that's the first thing. The other really important one that I would say, and there's several. I think there's probably about 6 different things that I talk about, but the other really important one is protect your sanity at all costs.
Oh, amen to that.
Because there is so much that intentional deception, intentional gaslighting, intentional manipulation, intentional ignoring of our voices, right, that we're dealing with. And these things are designed. There are people who their conscious objective when they wake up in the morning is to steal sanity away from you. And I'm a big nerd, so I use a lot of, like, Monty Python, for example, cultural references. I use Star Trek, I use Star
Lord
Wars,
of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings, all of it. But I give the example of, there's this great episode from Star Trek: The Next Generation where Captain Picard has been taken captive. He's been tortured for months. He's being gaslit, and the way that they're doing it is they're trying to make him he sees 4 lights, and they're trying to make him acknowledge that there's 5 lights when in reality there's only 4. And so every time he says that there's 4 lights, they torture him, and this just goes on and on and on. And then finally he's about to break, and his torturer says, like, everything that you've endured, this has all been for nothing. We got the information that we wanted. I'm going to continue doing this for the rest of your life just for fun, or you can admit that there's 5 lights, and I will allow you to stay here. You'll have access to women and to warmth and food and clothing, and you'll have the ability to continue your scholarship and all these other great things. All you have to do is admit that there's 5 lights. And right before you can tell that he's going to say it, he gets interrupted and realizes that he's actually been freed, and that the purpose of this last ditch effort was just to see if he could be broken. And the captain realizes that he's being rescued, and right before he walks out the door, he turns around and he screams, "There are 4 lights." And later he's talking with the ship's counselor, and she's like, "I read your report." And he's like, the one thing that I didn't put in there is that there was a moment where I thought that there really were 5 lights.
Wow.
And what I I use that analogy because, if you think about like prisoners of war, they're told you can give your name, your rank, and your serial number. And that is because your name's not going to change. You know what your name is. You can give your rank. You know who you are. You know, like, where you belong in this society. Okay. And you know your identity, your serial number. Okay. Those things are things without change. No matter what else you're told, those things aren't going to change. And so you have that truth to hold on to. And I think that as believers, as minorities who have been wounded by white Christianity, it is so important for us to have an understanding of who we are, where we belong in society, what our identity is, and that's not going to change no matter what society says to us, no matter what they try to do to us, no matter what lies they spit, whatever it is. We know these things and we can hold on to our sanity. If nothing else, if we can just hold on to those things, we can hold on to our sanity. And so it's so important. So that's another thing that I would give to your audience. So is I would just say, yeah, make sure that you're leaving these toxic spaces and that you're fighting to maintain your sanity, because those are the most important things that you can do, I think, in this time period in order to get your way out.
Man, that is good. And I'm also thinking how freaking hard just that one step is. And that's part of my research too, is the coercive control that is happening in those toxic spaces, that and the crazy making, right? It's psychological torture.
Yeah.
It's group psychological abuse that they use over and over and over again. And so many people have, like me, I was raised in, I was born into it. I didn't realize that it was happening until much, much later. So you've got this group psychological coercive control that is happening. And then in order for people to leave these toxic spaces, that means they have to leave and lose everything. And so why that sitting around the fire, creating safe spaces is so important, but some people don't know where to find that. So I'm really hopeful for your book that it can create that, or maybe there, that, if you end up doing something online where it just creates a space or something where people can go and find other like-minded people and find people that can sit around a fire with them, because that's what I have found is that, you're going to lose your family, your community, your identity, your God. That's kind of what's in my paper, these primary losses that you experience once you leave those toxic spaces. And I think you had even mentioned it yourself in the deconstruction process. You were like, I started kind of already at kind of not the most solid place, but then it was like slippery slope all the way down, and everything you lose in that process. You lose the people you thought were friends, the community, everything.
Yeah.
So can you speak a little bit more to what you experienced when you were kind of that deconstruction for yourself?
Yeah. I found for me that it was much like the analogy that I give is it's like leaving an abusive relationship.
Yeah.
And I think because the dynamics are so similar, and I see this in my work as an attorney, is that, when women in particular who are trying to escape from abusive situations, they lose the support of their friends and their community, because like they're mutuals and they don't know what to believe or who to side with, or or they pick a side and they pick the wrong side. Family members that doubt you. In 2020 I'm in an interracial marriage, and my advocacy and being outspoken online became such a contentious issue in my family that we lost all contact with my sister-in-law, my wife's sister. And literally had not spoken for 4 years. And so they've had children since then. We've not seen their children.
Oh my goodness.
It's just, and we live in the same town. Financial support. I know people that are missionaries who are raising support, and then they started seeing things differently, and all of a sudden their financial support dried up. And like you said, identity, like everything is, tied up in who I am as a Christian and all these things that I've grown to understand about myself. But, now like I have so many questions. For me, I had to take things down. Like my deconstruction process was so ugly, so messy. I went down to the atoms and the molecules. Like just nothing could stay, nothing. And I'm a lifelong Christian.
Right.
And so I never thought there was a lot of guilt with having to process with that level of intensity, because I never thought that I would question anything about how I was taught the Bible works or who God is or all that stuff growing up.
You said you were kind of side-eyeing Jesus a little bit.
Yeah, like,
and I was
yeah.
like, same.
Yeah, like I mean, I began to quite like, okay, who do I know is a historical figure in the Bible? If there's a question about it, then like let's start over. And so I went down. So where I've landed is that basically, if it didn't come out of Jesus's mouth, then I haven't thrown out my Bible, but I understand now that the Bible is, first of all, it's not one book, it's a library. I understand that there are people that were excluded from the conversation in terms of what books should be in that library. I understand that there's perspectives that are important. Even Paul, I think it's funny that, we recognize that, Peter might have been a little bit of a racist, but like we don't want to recognize that Paul might have been a little misogynish, little scotch misogynistic, and so like these are human beings. They didn't know that they were writing, quote, the Bible when they wrote it,
Right.
and so like everything I had to go down to, like, it's one thing to think about, like, okay, we've got a problem with this house and maybe it still has good bones, but then like you strip everything down and you realize like, oh no, the bones are trash too, and we have foundation problems and the soil is contaminated. Like, let's start all over.
Maybe we should move.
Right.
Yeah.
We're planning
Yeah.
to build the place. Maybe
Yeah.
think about
So
that's so true. Yeah. One of the things that I kept writing over and over again in the side of the book was I kept putting remnant. That's what I kept hearing over and over again. I have a biblical studies degree, and in my history of Christianity class, that's what kept coming up for me over and over and over again, is that throughout all of Christian history, there have been these big explosions of toxicity over and over again, right? You've got Constantine and like making Christianity the law of the land, and then you've got these killings just because they were trying to dunk people with baptism and that wasn't right, and so then we're going to kill these people, and then we hate Muslims, so we're going to go out and kill all of them, and like just the toxicity that it has happened over and over again. And that was the thing that kept coming up, is that there's always this little remnant of people that were always just trying to get back to the words of Jesus, the words of Jesus, the words of Jesus, like you're talking about. And that's what I kept writing down. I was like, I think this is another remnant moment where there's such an explosion of toxicity. And how do we come together as a remnant to try to say, we're going to carry Christian, like Jesus's message forward?
Yeah.
How do we do that? I really believe that when the scripture talks about broad is the path to destruction and narrow is the way to righteousness, that it's talking about Christians, quote unquote.
Yeah.
It's not talking about all those secular sinners out there, but it's talking about the people who are calling themselves, quote unquote, Christians, that it's pretty broad. And there's always going to be this little path that are really just trying to live according to love and, the fruits of the Spirit.
Right.
We're really trying to live according to that. And that's what I hear you calling again and again in your book was like, come on, where's the remnant? Let's come together. Let's have these conversations. Let's talk. How do we build this? How do we go forward?
Yeah, and that's the hope that I want people to take with them. And I think I talk about this in the last chapter, is that there is this faithful remnant of believers that's out there, even if you don't see all of them. And I think it's really tempting. You know, we were raised, probably, if you're anything like me, to believe, like, you know, your story, your faith journey, you have to be a David, right? Like you have to be the main character. You have to be doing this huge thing. But you know, there's Priscillas and Aquillas out there, you know, that just like are just faithfully, quietly doing the work. And you know, to your point, there is, you know, I think that people think about, you know, that verse where Jesus is saying, like, okay, so there's people that are going to say to me, like, you know, didn't we do all these wonderful things? In your name, we casted out demons. Okay, so like, let's stop and think about what that means. Like, the people that did this were not the world, right? Like, these were people that were identifying themselves as believers and saying, I'm going to cast out this demon, right? And they did it. Like, not only did they try to do it, they did it. It worked. In your name, we casted out demons, and we we did all these things. And yet Jesus would say, I never knew you.
I didn't know you.
I have no idea who you are.
So it's the church that, like, it's always been the church that has to be careful. It's always been the church that Jesus has been concerned with, like, saying, like, get your stuff together.
Yeah.
And I just think that
It's so true.
we miss that. I think that it's just too tempting to say, you know, it's them over there. It's us. And I think that the people that are interested in reading this book, I think that they will understand that. I think that they will get that. You know, that level of introspection, we find it here. Sometimes it's hard to find elsewhere.
Yes, very true. Anything that we did not cover that you want to touch on?
Yeah, one of the things that my publisher did that I'm really happy about is in the back of the book, there's a few questions. I think it's maybe like somewhere between 10 and 20 that are geared towards these communal kinds of conversations, like you were saying.
Brilliant.
And so, you know, it really does encourage people to take the book and use it as a tool, as an instrument, you know, to sit down and lead conversations and say, for example, one of the ones that I can think of is, you know, how do we know when it's time to leave a space that has become unhealthy for us? Like, do you find yourself in this space yelling into the wind? Do you find yourself working uphill? Do you find that there are people that are you know, actively opposing your efforts to be more inclusive? And do you find like there's only one perspective or one understanding of Scripture that is allowed to permeate in this space? Like, those are things that can kind of help you evaluate, am I in the wrong place? Is it time for me to go? And those sort of identifiers, those markers are just so important. I want, at the end of the day, this book, I want people to be free. And so I want them to, if you see yourself in the book, and if you say, oh my gosh, I can identify with what he's saying, and you say, okay, now what do I do? And you find that the answer is within that book, then I have achieved my purpose.
How do you, how could white Christians, and even white Christians within the remnant, even those who are going to want to sit down and sit around the fire, how can they do a better job of listening? And not just listening to, you know, pacify, but actually listening and doing a better job of that. And not just be little, you know, white saviors who are going to step in and do everything. I mean, but how can we do that a little bit better?
I think that when you have the desire, when you truly have the desire to learn, to understand, it's just like any relationship. If you really love your partner, then you're going to want to sit down and, like you said, not just pacify, but really understand where they're coming from, and be okay with being wrong, be okay with, things being messy and working through that, but saying, you know what, we're committed to one another, and I know that you're not the enemy, and you know that I'm not the enemy, and we're going to make this work, and I'm committed to listening and walking through this path of wholeness with you, and just having that level of humility. I think that that's really all that we can ask from allies. And as I say that, I think it's also important to recognize that there's different circles in this sort of Venn diagram. Like, for example, there's times that I, as a black man, can punch down to women because I'm a man. And there are times where white women can punch down to me because I'm black. And so, we have things to learn from one another. And so, like, there's this level of humility that I think that we just need to approach these conversations with. But I think that anyone that is willing to sit down and read through this book is already at least walking the right direction.
Well, I'm so excited that you wrote it.
I have a brilliant idea.
Spreading it around.
I just had like this wonderful epiphany, Robert. Okay, this is what I think you should do.
I'm worried.
Yeah.
Me too.
We can always edit this out. Okay. So Narcotics Anonymous has this website where you can
I just heard
log
narcotics
in.
and I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So we should all take some narcotics and sit around a campfire and just see what happens. Let's just see what happens, Robert. No,
I'm sorry.
No, believe me. This is what I get all the time. I'm like, I have no idea what's coming next.
Yeah, I've been so good. You better explain, Britt, that I've been so good this entire. Yeah, I have reined it in. Okay, but back to my brilliant idea. Okay, so Narcotics Anonymous has this website where you can log on at any time, day or night, anywhere around the world, and it will log you into a marathon meeting. It's called a marathon meeting. And you can just jump in and engage in, like, healing conversation on your recovery journey. So I'm thinking you create a website called The Holy Place, WHOLEY.
Ooh.
The Holy Place, with just one 24-hour continuous conversation of anybody who wants to jump in at any time and just converse and come together all over. Yeah, see, that's freaking brilliant.
See, that was brilliant.
I'm so sorry.
You don't need anybody to like volunteer to host for, like, conversations for like an hour every day or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm already volunteering.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's good. That's a solid idea.
I like that.
Yeah.
See, I didn't even use the word vagina. I didn't talk about Jerry Falwell. I didn't.
Thanks, Kristen.
Yeah. See, I can do it.
Oh, God. You can. I'm so proud of you, Kristen. Okay, so before we let you go, because I know our time is about up, or it is up, but also want to make sure that we plug your TikToks, because holy hell.
Amazing.
I was laughing so hard. They're so good. The one about the Olympics was killing me.
King James? Oh my gosh, that was hilarious.
But you've got this picture of this basketball player like jumping up for a shot, and then he's got, a picture of Jesus ascending to heaven. He's like, how do you explain this? Oh, it's so funny.
Yes.
Just to make fun of all the
and the
people who
Iron
were
Cross
going
and
crazy
oh
about
my
the
gosh.
Last Supper thing, which we touched on our last episode. I think, of like that ridiculousness. So,
Yeah.
I wanted to put that out there as well
Yeah.
because your stuff is really funny too.
I appreciate it. Yeah, my TikTok is at R Callahan Waco 2. Callahan is Callahan. And then my Instagram is R Callahan _Waco. So you can find some of my content there.
And we'll put all that in the notes too if anybody wants to find him. Anything else?
No, I just would be remiss if I didn't say thank you so much for having me here, and thank you to your audience for being willing to engage in these conversations and to listen.
We're so glad you were willing to come on and speak with us and be so
Blessing
open
us
and
with the honor of your
vulnerable. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's been
Yeah,
amazing.
for sure.
Been amazing to talk to you today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep. And if
So
you are interested in the book, it will be
I'm
available
interested.
on
But-
Amazon. You can pre-order
okay.
it. Yep.
Yeah. We will pre-order, yes. And I will definitely be sharing your book I will be sharing it far and wide, giving it its copies and everything, because it is really needed.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. Proud of you
Oh, thank you so much.
for doing this. It's amazing. So I hope that it just goes amazing for you.
Me too.
I hope it gets big and just blows up
Yeah,
for you.
well, the society needs it.
Hmm.
We need it.
We all do.
so-
So thank you again.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Have a
Appreciate
good
you.
one.
You
Take
too.
care.
Thank you.
We'll talk to you later. Okay. Bye.
Bye.